Clara's voice, a crystalline instrument honed by years of private education and practiced indifference, cut through the polite murmur of the gala. "Oh, Liam," she said, her laugh a delicate tinkling sound that didn't reach her eyes. "He's a wonderful man, truly, but his ambitions are quaint. He has his little architectural projects, of course, freelance things. It's a struggle, but we manage. I suppose one of us has to be the practical one in the family." She was speaking to the Hendersons, a couple whose net worth was a recurring topic in the city's glossy magazines. Mrs. Henderson offered Liam a look of profound pity, the kind one reserves for a stray dog in the rain. Mr. Henderson simply looked past him, his eyes scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. This was the third time in less than an hour that Clara had performed this little routine, painting him as a charming but financially inept burden she graciously carried. Each telling was slightly more embellished, each sigh a little more dramatic. Liam stood beside her, a ghost at his own wife's side. He held a glass of sparkling water, the bubbles rising and popping in a silent, fizzing protest. He wore a simple, well-tailored navy suit that Clara had called funereal before they left the house. He hadn't argued. He hadn't said a word. He simply watched her, his expression a placid mask that betrayed none of the cold, methodical calculations taking place behind his eyes. He had known this was coming. He had, in fact, counted on it. The setting was a cathedral of wealth, the grand ballroom of the newly opened Pinnacle Tower, a soaring skyscraper that had redefined the city's skyline. Crystal chandeliers, each the size of a small car, dripped light onto the polished marble floors. The city's elite, draped in silk and diamonds, moved through the space with the predatory grace of sharks in a gilt-edged aquarium. And at the center of it all was his wife, Clara, holding court, using his perceived failure as a social currency. She thought he was broke. She had told her friends, her family, and now it seemed anyone at this gala who would listen. They didn't know that every pane of glass in this soaring tower, every steel beam that held them aloft 60 stories in the air, had first been a line drawn by his own hand. They didn't know that the very foundation of the building they stood upon was a testament to his quaint ambitions. Within 2 hours, every single person in this room, especially his wife, would understand the profound and catastrophic nature of their mistake. The humiliation she had so carefully crafted for him was a fragile thing, and it was about to shatter. I hope you're settling in for this one. It's going to be a journey, and I'm so glad to have you along for the ride. Do me a quick favor and tap that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It really helps us bring more stories like this to you. And I'm always curious to know where our stories are reaching. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Now, let's get back to it. The clock was ticking, and the main event was about to begin. The story of Liam and Clara Sterling was, from the outside, a classic tale of opposites attracting. Clara was the daughter of Richard and Eleanor Vance, a family whose old money was so old it had begun to fossilize. They lived in a world of inherited certainties, where a person's worth was measured by their last name, the square footage of their home, and the number of influential people who would take their call. Clara had been raised to be an ornament, a beautiful, polished piece of the family legacy. She was charming, socially adept, and possessed a deep, instinctual understanding of power dynamics. Liam, by contrast, was a man who seemed to have been built from the ground up. He had no prestigious family name, no inherited estate. He had only his mind, his quiet determination, and a talent for seeing the hidden structures of the world. They met at a university mixer. He was a graduate student in architecture, sketching in a worn notebook, and she was an art history major, holding a glass of champagne and looking bored. She was drawn to what she perceived as his raw, unpolished potential. He was, in her mind, a project, a handsome, intelligent block of marble she could sculpt into a man who would be worthy of her world. He was captivated by her vibrancy, her confidence, a quality he, in his quiet introspection, lacked. He mistook her interest in his potential for an interest in him. The first few years were a blur of genuine affection. He was finishing his degree, and she was delighted to play the role of the supportive partner to a brilliant, struggling artist. She would bring him coffee while he worked late into the night on his designs, her presence a bright spark in the quiet solitude of his work. But after they were married, the dynamic began to shift. Clara's patience for the struggling artist phase wore thin. She had expected his brilliance to translate quickly, almost magically, into wealth and status. She wanted the sprawling modernist house he could design, but she also wanted it to be featured in magazines. She wanted the brilliant husband, but she also wanted the world to acknowledge his brilliance in the only language she truly understood: money. Her father, Richard Vance, had never approved of the match. Richard was a man whose personality had been pressed and starched along with his shirts. He saw Liam not as a son-in-law, but as a stain on the family's pristine reputation. An architect, he had scoffed during their first meeting, a glorified contractor, a tradesman with a fancy degree. What can he offer my daughter? Liam had tried to connect with him, explaining the complex interplay of physics, aesthetics, and human psychology that went into his work. Richard had waved a dismissive hand. Just tell me when you build something taller than my office building, son. Then we'll talk. It was a joke, but it laid the foundation for their entire relationship. Liam was a man to be tolerated, a curiosity Clara had brought home that they were all waiting to tire of. Over the years, the pressure from Clara and her family mounted. It was subtle at first, a suggestion that he take a more stable job at a large, soulless corporate firm. A backhanded compliment about a small project he completed. It's a lovely little house, dear, for people of that sort. They didn't understand his process. He turned down lucrative but uninspired projects, the kind of cookie-cutter luxury condos Richard Vance's own development company built. Liam was pursuing a vision, a new way of integrating structures with their environment, of creating spaces that served humanity, not just vanity. To Clara, this was just an excuse for failure. His refusal to compromise his principles looked like a stubborn refusal to succeed. Her encouragement curdled into resentment. She began to see his quiet nature not as thoughtfulness, but as weakness. His humility was not a virtue, but a lack of ambition. 2 years ago, Liam had been approached for a project that he knew would be the culmination of his life's work. It was a secret competition, sponsored by the enigmatic billionaire philanthropist Alistair Finch, to design a new global headquarters for his foundation. It was to be a landmark, a beacon of sustainable innovation and architectural genius. The project was codenamed Ethelgard. Liam poured his soul into it, working in the small home office Clara had begun to call his hobbit hole. He told her he was working on a large-scale competition entry, but he was spare with the details, partly out of a non-disclosure agreement and partly because he knew she would not understand. She saw only the long hours, the lack of immediate financial reward. Another one of your little contests, she'd say, her voice dripping with condescension. Don't get your hopes up, darling. We still have the mortgage to think about. When he won, he didn't tell her. The announcement was to be a closely guarded secret until the foundation's annual charity gala. The prize wasn't just a commission, it was a partnership with Finch himself, a percentage of the project's considerable profits, and a seat at a table so exclusive, Clara couldn't even imagine it. He kept the contract, the proof of his success, in a simple, worn leather portfolio he carried with him everywhere. He knew the gala would be the perfect stage. He needed to see, with absolute clarity, who she was when she believed he had nothing. He needed the world she cared so much about to be the audience. So he played his part, enduring the quiet humiliations, the pitying looks, the casual dismissals. He let her believe he was a failure, all the while knowing he held the blueprints to her entire world in his hands. Their arrival at the gala had been the opening act of the tragic comedy Clara was directing. Liam had driven them in his car, a 10-year-old sedan he kept in immaculate condition. It was a reliable, comfortable vehicle, but in the valet line, surrounded by a gleaming procession of Bentleys and Ferraris, it might as well have been a donkey cart. The valet, a young man with a carefully neutral expression, couldn't quite hide his surprise. Clara had stepped out of the car with a sigh of theatrical martyrdom, as if she were disembarking from a prison transport. "Thank you," she'd murmured to the valet, a slight emphasis on the words that suggested he deserved a medal for touching such a pedestrian vehicle. Her parents were waiting for them just inside the grand entrance. Richard Vance surveyed Liam's navy suit, his gaze lingering for a moment on the simple, classic lines. "Sterling," he said, his voice a low rumble of disapproval. "Still dressing for a job interview, I see. I suppose one must always be prepared." "It's a classic suit, Father," Clara said, linking her arm through her father's, a subtle act of realignment. She was with him, not with Liam. "Of course, dear," her mother, Eleanor, chimed in. Eleanor was a woman who communicated primarily through disappointed smiles and subtle, cutting observations. "It's very sensible. Liam is always so sensible." The word hung in the air, meaning what it always meant when she said it. Boring, unambitious, poor. Liam simply inclined his head. "Richard, Eleanor, good to see you both." He offered no defense. He knew that any attempt to justify himself would be seen as a sign of weakness. His strategy was one of quiet observation. He was a collector of slights, an archivist of insults. He filed each one away, not with anger, but with a chilling sense of clarity. Every condescending word, every dismissive glance, was another brick in the wall he was building between his future and his past. He carried his worn leather portfolio. It was old, the corners softened with use, the leather bearing the faint scars of countless journeys. In Clara's world of pristine designer handbags and custom monogram briefcases, it was an anomaly. "For heaven's sake, Liam, must you carry that shabby thing everywhere?" Clara had hissed as they walked towards the ballroom. "You look like a door-to-door salesman. What's even in there?" "Work," he'd replied softly. "Well, whatever it is, it's embarrassing. Can't you leave it in the car?" "No," he said, his voice calm, but with an edge of finality that surprised her into silence. "I need it with me." He clutched the handle, the worn leather of familiar comfort. It was his anchor in this sea of glittering superficiality. It contained the truth. As they moved deeper into the gala, the humiliation intensified, becoming a performance piece for Clara's social circle. She introduced him with a carefully crafted preamble. "You remember my husband, Liam," she would begin, her hand resting lightly on his arm in a gesture that looked supportive but felt like an arrest. "He's the creative genius of the family. He's working on a very personal project right now. It takes up all his time. We're so proud of his dedication, even if it means, well, you know." She would finish with a brave little smile, leaving the rest to their imagination. They knew. They filled in the blanks with all the predictable assumptions. He was unemployed. He was failing. He was living off her family's money. The men would give Liam a brief, dismissive handshake before turning to discuss stock portfolios and yacht acquisitions. The women would give Clara looks of sympathetic solidarity, patting her arm and whispering, "You are a saint, Clara, a true saint." The performance reached its crescendo when Richard Vance cornered Liam by the champagne fountain. He put a heavy, paternalistic hand on Liam's shoulder. "Son," he began, using the term not as a sign of affection, but of ownership. "I've been thinking, this architecture fantasy of yours, it's been going on for a while. A man needs to provide for his family, for my daughter." Liam met his gaze, his own eyes unreadable. "I provide for her, Richard." Richard let out a short, barking laugh. "A 2-bedroom condo and a 10-year-old car? That's not providing, that's..." Camping. Listen, I have a position at Advanced Development, Assistant Project Manager. It's mostly paperwork, overseeing contractors, making sure they don't steal copper piping. It's not glorious, but it's a steady paycheck. A real job. I'm prepared to offer it to you, for Clara's sake. It was the ultimate insult, delivered under the guise of charity. He was being offered a menial job, a handout to save his father-in-law the embarrassment of a failed son-in-law. The position he described was one Liam would have assigned to a junior intern a decade ago. Liam felt a cold stillness settle over him. He could see the scene with perfect architectural clarity. The way Richard stood, chest puffed out, a benevolent king offering a crust of bread to a peasant. The way Clara watched from a few feet away, a flicker of triumph in her eyes. The way the other guests floated by, oblivious. "Thank you for the offer, Richard," Liam said, his voice even. "I appreciate you thinking of me. I'll give it the consideration it deserves." It was a non-answer, a polite deflection, but Richard took it as a victory. He clapped Liam's shoulder again, harder this time. "Good man, you're finally seeing sense. Let me know on Monday, we'll get you started." He walked away, smug and self-satisfied, to rejoin his wife and daughter. Clara drifted over to Liam, her smile bright and brittle. "Was that so hard, darling?" she whispered. "Father is just trying to help. It's a good opportunity to finally get your feet on solid ground." "Solid ground," Liam repeated softly, looking not at her but through her, at the magnificent soaring glass wall of the ballroom. He had designed the precise engineering calculations that allowed that wall to stand, a seamless curtain of crystal that held back the night. "Yes," he said, "I suppose we all need that." He tightened his grip on the leather portfolio. The first act was over. The stage was now set for the finale. The lights in the grand ballroom began to dim, a subtle cue that drew the scattered conversations into a collective, expectant hush. Waitstaff moved with silent efficiency, clearing away empty glasses as the guests found their seats at lavishly decorated tables. A single, brilliant spotlight cut through the gloom, illuminating the grand podium at the front of the room. The quiet before the storm. Liam found a position near the back, standing beside a marble column, partially obscured from the main floor. He preferred it this way. It gave him a vantage point, a place to observe the final moments of the world as it was. Clara had been seated at a prominent table near the front with her parents, a position befitting their perceived status. She had shot him a look of mild irritation, a silent command for him to join them, but he had given a slight shake of his head. He needed this distance. He could see them clearly. Richard Vance was leaning back in his chair, a portrait of patriarchal contentment, occasionally murmuring something to the banking executive seated beside him. Eleanor was adjusting the fall of her silk shawl, her eyes scanning the room, assessing, judging. And Clara was radiant. She was in her element, the center of a glittering universe, laughing and smiling, utterly confident in her place in the world and in his. She believed he was in the shadows because he was ashamed, because he didn't belong. She had no idea he was in the wings, waiting for his cue. He allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He thought of the thousands of hours he had poured into the Ethelgard project, the sleepless nights, the countless revisions, the moments of doubt followed by breakthroughs of pure, exhilarating clarity. He had created something that would outlast everyone in this room, a building that was not just a structure, but a statement of purpose. It was a symphony of glass and steel and light, designed to be not only beautiful, but also the most environmentally sustainable skyscraper ever built. It would house a free public library, a medical research facility, and an arts incubator, all funded by the commercial floors above. It was his life's work, his soul rendered in concrete. Gently, he unlatched his leather portfolio. He didn't open it fully, just enough to see the top page. It wasn't a contract or a deed. It was the final architectural rendering of the Ethelgard Tower, a breathtaking image of the building at sunrise, its spire seeming to pierce the heavens. He had drawn it himself, by hand. He looked at the clean, confident lines, the intricate detail. This was who he was, not the failure his wife described, not the charity case her father saw. He was a builder, a creator, a man who shaped the world. A wave of calm washed over him. The anger, the frustration he had carefully suppressed all evening dissolved into a profound sense of peace. He was not here for revenge. Revenge was a petty, corrosive thing. He was here for the truth. The truth had its own weight, its own power, and it was about to be brought into the light. He closed the portfolio, the soft click of the latch echoing in the quiet space around him. He looked back at the stage. A man was walking towards the podium, a figure of quiet authority who moved with an easy, unassuming grace. He was of average height, with a shock of silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold a genuine, intelligent warmth. This was Alistair Finch, a man whose name was a byword for integrity and vision. A man who had become, over the past 2 years, Liam's patron, his collaborator, and his friend. A man who knew the whole story. Liam gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The show was about to begin. Alistair Finch tapped the microphone, the soft sounds silencing the last vestiges of murmuring in the ballroom. "Good evening, everyone," he began, his voice calm and resonant, filling the vast space without any hint of strain. "Thank you all for being here tonight. Your generosity continues to be the lifeblood of the work we do at the Finch Foundation, and for that, you have my deepest gratitude." He spoke for a few minutes about the Foundation's recent initiatives, funding for literacy programs, clean water projects, and medical research. He was a gifted speaker, engaging and sincere, without a trace of the self-congratulatory tone that so often accompanied philanthropic speeches. Liam watched Clara's table. They were listening intently, their expressions a mixture of respect and admiration. Alistair Finch was one of the few people on earth that Richard Vance looked up to. To be acknowledged by him was the ultimate status symbol. "But tonight," Finch continued, his voice taking on a new energy, "I'm not here to talk about what we've done. I'm here to talk about what we are about to do. I'm here to talk about the future of this city." A murmur of excitement rippled through the crowd. Behind Finch, a massive screen flickered to life, though it remained dark for now. "For the past 5 years," Finch said, "my foundation has been planning its most ambitious project yet, a new global headquarters. But we didn't want just another glass tower, another monument to corporate ego. We wanted to create a landmark that would give back to the city that has given us so much. A building that would be a beacon of innovation, sustainability, and community." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "We wanted a building with a soul." At Clara's table, Richard Vance leaned forward, his interest piqued. This was the language of legacy, of power, of big money. He had heard rumors about Finch's new project, but the details had been kept under an ironclad veil of secrecy. "To find the right vision," Finch went on, "we launched a global competition, inviting submissions from the world's most renowned architectural firms. We received over 200 proposals, breathtaking designs from titans of the industry. But one design, one submission stood apart from all the rest. It was audacious. It was brilliant. It was, in a word, revolutionary." The screen behind him lit up. The image that appeared was the one from Liam's portfolio, the Ethelgard Tower at sunrise. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom. The design was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was elegant and powerful, a graceful spire that seemed to twist towards the sky, its crystalline facade integrated with vertical gardens and solar sails. It was a work of art. "This," Finch announced, his voice filled with pride, "is the Ethelgard Tower, the future home of the Finch Foundation, and a gift to the people of this city." He let the image hold for a long moment, allowing the sheer beauty and ambition of the design to sink in. Then he smiled. A building this extraordinary could only be conceived by an architect of extraordinary talent. We are often told that true genius is loud, that it announces itself with fanfare. But I have learned that the deepest rivers are often the quietest. The architect of this masterpiece is not a household name. He does not seek the spotlight. He is a man of quiet dignity, of immense integrity, a man who puts the work above all else. He is an artist in the truest sense of the word. Liam felt his heart beating a steady, powerful rhythm. This was the moment. He watched Clara. Her eyes were wide, fixed on the screen, her face a mask of awe. She was utterly captivated by the vision, by the power it represented. Finch's voice dropped slightly, drawing the audience in. It is my profound honor and my great personal pleasure to introduce you to the visionary mind behind the Ethelgard Tower. A man I am proud to call my partner and my friend. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Mr. Liam Sterling. The name dropped into the silent ballroom like a stone into a perfectly still lake. For a fraction of a second, there was nothing. Just the name, hanging in the air, suspended in a state of collective disbelief. The sound of a champagne flute slipping from someone's fingers and shattering on the marble floor was unnaturally loud. Then the spotlight, which had been on Finch, swung across the room. It swept past the stunned faces at the front tables, a brilliant beam of light searching, hunting. It found Liam, standing by his column, and bathed him in a circle of pure, white light. The world seemed to move in slow motion. Liam could see every detail with crystalline precision. He saw Richard Vance's jaw literally drop, his face slack with a comical, horrified disbelief. He saw Eleanor's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with a dawning, sickening understanding. And he saw Clara. Her face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, painted in rapid, chaotic strokes. First, confusion. Sterling? It was a common enough name. It couldn't be. It was a mistake. Then, as the spotlight found her husband, standing there not in the shadows of failure, but in the brilliant glare of triumph, the confusion curdled into pure, unadulterated shock. Her smile, the one she had worn all night, froze on her face, a brittle, cracking facade. Her eyes, which had been so full of pity for him moments before, were now vast, empty pools of bewilderment. She looked from the stage to the screen and then to Liam, her head turning mechanically like a doll. It wasn't computing. The man she had just spent the entire evening publicly pitying, the man her father had just offered a menial job, the architect of that masterpiece? It was impossible. Alistair Finch's voice broke the spell. Liam, come on up. The applause started, hesitant at first, then swelling into a thunderous wave as the reality of the situation began to ripple through the room. People were turning in their seats, craning their necks, whispering. Was that Clara Vance's husband? The one she said was struggling? The quiet man in the plain suit? Liam pushed himself off the column and began to walk towards the stage. He moved with a calm, unhurried grace, his steps even and measured on the marble floor. He felt 1,000 pairs of eyes on him, but his gaze was fixed on the stage. He walked through the parted sea of the city's elite, past the tables of the people who had pitied him, ignored him, and dismissed him. He passed the Hendersons, whose mouths were agape. He passed his wife's table. He did not look at her. He did not need to. He could feel the heat of her stunned, horrified gaze on his skin. He reached the stage and shook Alistair Finch's outstretched hand. Finch clapped him on the shoulder, a genuine gesture of warmth and respect. "The stage is yours, my friend," he murmured, his eyes twinkling. Liam stepped up to the podium. He looked out at the sea of faces, a blur of jewels and astonishment. He adjusted the microphone, the small movement seeming to command the absolute attention of everyone in the room. Thank you, Alistair, he began, his voice as calm and steady as it had been all night. It carried to every corner of the ballroom. Thank you, everyone. I am deeply honored. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room until they found his wife's. He met her gaze across the distance. Her face was pale, her expression shattered. Some of you, he continued, his voice soft but clear, may be surprised to see me up here. You may have heard that my ambitions are quaint. He used her own word, letting it hang in the air, a quiet bomb that detonated in the silence. You may have heard that I was a struggling artist, a project, a burden. He saw Clara flinch as if he had struck her. Her father looked as if he was having trouble breathing. It's true that I have been working on a very personal project, Liam said, his gaze unwavering. This project, I believe that a person's worth is not measured by the noise they make, but by the foundations they build. It is not measured by the car they drive or the suit they wear. It is measured by their integrity, their dedication, and the truth of their work. The Ethelgard Tower is my truth, and I am grateful to finally have the chance to share it with you. He spoke for another minute, a short, eloquent, and humble speech about his vision for the building in the city. And when he finished, the room erupted. The applause was deafening, a genuine, overwhelming ovation of respect and awe. As he stepped down from the stage, he was immediately engulfed by a crowd of people. Bankers, CEOs, city officials, the very people who had ignored him an hour earlier, were now pushing forward, thrusting business cards into his hand, slapping his back, desperate to be associated with him, with his success. Through a gap in the crowd, he saw Clara and her parents. They were on their feet, but they were frozen, isolated in a bubble of their own public humiliation. The spotlight had moved on, but the glare of their misjudgment was just as harsh. Richard looked apoplectic, a man who had just bet his entire fortune on the wrong horse and watched it collapse at the finish line. Eleanor looked faint, and Clara just stared at him, her face a ruin. The woman who had so carefully orchestrated his public shaming was now the subject of 1,000 pitying, scornful whispers. The reversal was complete. It was absolute, and it was devastatingly quiet. The crush of well-wishers around Liam was a physical barrier, a testament to his new status. He navigated the sea of congratulations with a polite but detached grace, accepting handshakes and murmuring his thanks. He was looking for Alistair Finch, but he knew another, more pressing confrontation was inevitable. He saw them making their way towards him, a small, desperate phalanx against the tide of his newfound admirers. Clara was in the lead, her face a pale, tight mask. Her father and mother followed, their expressions grim. They looked like a delegation coming to sue for peace after a battle they had catastrophically lost. A security guard, seeing their determined approach, moved to intercept them. Liam gave a slight shake of his head, and the guard stepped back. He owed them this. He owed himself this. They finally reached him in a small, relatively quiet alcove near the Grand Terrace doors. The din of the party was a dull roar behind them. For a moment, nobody spoke. The silence was thick with unspoken accusations and frantic, panicked thoughts. It was Clara who broke it, her voice a strained, unnatural whisper. Liam, I don't understand. Don't you, Clara? He asked, his voice devoid of heat. It was worse than anger. It was a cold, factual calm. It seems quite simple to me. You thought I was a failure. You were wrong. But why didn't you tell me? She pleaded, taking a step closer. She tried to reach for his arm, the familiar gesture of ownership, but he shifted slightly, and her hand fell back to her side. The small movement was a rejection more profound than any shout. All this time, the Ethelgard Tower, that was your little contest? It was, he confirmed. Richard Vance finally found his voice. It was a strangled, hoarse sound, nothing like his usual confident boom. Sterling, My God, Finch's new headquarters. The biggest contract in this city in a decade. You, you're the architect? I am, Liam said, turning his calm gaze on his father-in-law. Richard's mind was clearly racing, the gears of calculation grinding furiously. The initial shock was wearing off, being replaced by a desperate, grasping opportunism. The humiliation was a sunk cost. The potential for profit was the future. Listen, son, he started, his tone shifting, attempting a gruff, man-to-man familiarity. I may have misjudged. You've been playing this one close to the vest. I respect that. A smart move. Now, Vance Development, we're the best in the city. We'd be a natural fit for the construction bid. With you on the inside, we could put together a proposal that... Liam held up a hand, a simple gesture that cut Richard off mid-sentence. Stop, Richard. The command was spoken softly, but it had the force of a steel door slamming shut. Richard's mouth snapped closed. Let's be clear about what happened here tonight, Liam said, his eyes moving from Richard to Eleanor and finally to his wife. He began to list his grievances, not with rage, but with the dispassionate precision of an auditor reading a final report. Tonight, Eleanor, you called my suit sensible, a word you use to describe things you find pitifully inadequate. You've been doing that for 7 years. Eleanor paled, her hand fluttering to her throat. Tonight, Richard, you compared my car to a camping trip. You offered me a menial job managing contractors out of what you called pity, but what was actually a desire to control my wife by controlling me. You have never once, in all the years you have known me, asked a single, genuine question about my work. Richard's face was turning a blotchy red. And you, Clara, he said, his voice softening almost imperceptibly, which only made the words more devastating. Tonight you stood in front of the Hendersons, the Malones, and the Whitfields, and you told them I was a quaint financial burden. You painted yourself as a long-suffering saint, martyred to my lack of ambition. You sighed and smiled and accepted their pity, a currency you value far more than my respect. You did this while standing in a building I designed, at an event celebrating a project that I have poured my entire soul into for the past 2 years. He paused, letting the full weight of the indictment settle in the small space. This wasn't a one-time thing, he continued. This was just the final, public performance of a drama you've been acting out for years. You didn't marry a partner, Clara. You acquired a project. You wanted to fix me, to mold me into your image of success. And when I refused to become that, you grew to resent me. You didn't support me. You tolerated me. And tonight, you humiliated me. Not because you believed I was a failure, but because you were angry that I wasn't the kind of success you could show off to your friends. Tears were now streaming down Clara's face, silent, desperate tears. Liam, please, she whispered. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I love you. We can fix this. Can we? He asked, the question genuine but rhetorical. He opened his leather portfolio and took out a single folded document. It wasn't a blueprint. I saw a lawyer last week, Clara. I needed to protect my assets before tonight's announcement. The assets you didn't know I had. The ones earned from the Ethelgard project and several others you dismissed as freelance things. He handed her the document. It was a financial statement, a summary of his net worth. The number at the bottom had 8 zeros after the first digit. She stared at it, her hands trembling. This was the language she understood, and it was telling her she had made an error of catastrophic proportions. As for your offer, Richard, Liam said, turning back to him, the Finch Foundation has an ethics clause. All partners and contractors are vetted for integrity. Given your actions tonight and over the past several years, I can assure you that Vance Development will not be considered for any part of the Ethelgard project. In fact, Alistair and I will be speaking with the City Planning Commission tomorrow. I imagine they'll be very interested to hear about your attempts to leverage a family connection to influence a public-private partnership. Richard looked like he had been physically struck. The threat was clear. It wasn't just about one contract. It was about his reputation, his entire business. "You wouldn't," Richard breathed. "You underestimated me," Liam replied simply. It was the only explanation necessary. He looked back at his wife, who was still staring at the paper, her world collapsing in on itself. "I think we are done here." He turned and walked away, leaving them in the alcove, shipwrecked and silent. He stepped out onto the terrace, into the cool night air. The city spread out before him, a tapestry of glittering lights. He felt a profound sense of release, not of triumph, but of quiet, clean, and total liberation. The foundations for his new life had been laid. The 3 months that followed the gala were a study in consequences. The story of Liam Sterling's dramatic revelation became the stuff of city legend, whispered at cocktail parties and recounted in gossip columns. It was a modern-day fable about a prince disguised as a pauper, and everyone, it seemed, wanted to claim they had seen his royalty all along. For the Vance family, the fallout was swift and brutal. Richard Vance, true to Liam's word, found himself facing an inquiry from the city's ethics board. While no formal charges were filed, the investigation cast a pall over his reputation. Alistair Finch, in a quiet but decisive move, let it be known within the tight-knit community of developers and financiers that Vance Development was not to be trusted. Doors that had always been open were suddenly, politely, closed. Contracts that had been considered certainties were mysteriously awarded to competitors. Richard's empire, built on a foundation of bluster and connections, began to show cracks. He had lost the one thing he truly valued, the appearance of unimpeachable power. Clara's social world, which had been the entire focus of her existence, evaporated like morning mist. Her friends, the same women who had offered her sympathetic pats on the arm, now shunned her. She was no longer the tragic heroine of her own story. She was the villain of someone else's. She was seen as deceitful, cruel, and worst of all, foolish. She had held a winning lottery ticket in her hand and had thrown it away because she didn't like the design. Her invitations dried up. Her calls went unreturned. She was left alone in the grand house her father had bought for them, a gilded cage filled with the ghosts of her own misjudgments. She tried, of course. There were tearful phone calls, long, pleading emails sent to Liam's new address. She apologized profusely, endlessly. She loved him. She had made a terrible mistake. She had been blinded by her upbringing. She would change. But Liam knew her apologies were born not of remorse, but of regret. She wasn't sorry for how she had treated him. She was sorry she had been wrong about him. She was mourning the loss of the status and wealth he represented, not the loss of the man he was. He never replied. He had the divorce papers served by a courier, a clean, impersonal severance. Liam, meanwhile, was thriving. He moved out of the condo and into a beautiful, minimalist penthouse apartment overlooking the park, a place he had secretly bought months earlier. His life became consumed by the Ethelgard Tower. He was no longer just an architect, he was a leader, a visionary. He worked side by side with Alistair Finch, the two of them forging a powerful partnership built on mutual respect. Finch became the mentor and father figure Liam had never had. He was a man who understood, as Liam did, that true wealth wasn't about accumulation, but about creation. He saw the quiet strength in Liam that Clara and her family had mistaken for weakness. "They were looking at you, but they never saw you," Finch said one afternoon as they reviewed the final structural plans in Liam's new, sun-drenched office. "They were too busy looking at a reflection of their own values. They wanted you to be a mirror, and they got angry when you were a window to something they couldn't understand." The groundbreaking ceremony for the Ethelgard Tower was a major city event. The mayor was there, along with senators and titans of industry. Liam stood at the podium, not as a surprise reveal, but as the celebrated guest of honor. He spoke about the power of architecture to shape lives, to build communities, and to inspire hope. As he looked out at the crowd, he saw faces filled with genuine admiration and respect. There was no pity, no condescension. He was finally being seen for who he was. He didn't revel in the Vances' downfall. He took no pleasure in their suffering. He felt a sense of melancholy for the woman Clara could have been if she hadn't been so trapped by the shallow world she worshipped. But his primary emotion was a profound sense of peace. He had shed a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying for so many years. He was free to build, not just buildings, but a life of his own design, based on his own values. A life where his worth was not subject to the approval of others, but was self-evident, built into the very foundation of his being. One crisp autumn evening, 6 months after the gala, Liam stood on the observation deck of the Pinnacle Tower, the very building where his old life had ended and his new one had begun. The city glittered below him, a sprawling galaxy of light and possibility. Across the river, the construction site of the Ethelgard Tower was a hive of activity, its foundational structure beginning to rise from the earth, a skeleton of steel reaching for the sky. He thought back to that night, to the woman who had called his dreams quaint, and the man who had offered him a job out of pity. Their judgment, which had once felt so heavy, now seemed impossibly distant and insignificant. They had been judging a shadow, a projection of their own fears and limitations. They had never known the man at all. He had learned that true strength isn't about broadcasting your power. It's the quiet, patient work of building something real, something that will last. It's the integrity to stay true to your own vision, even when the world tells you it's worthless. Arrogance is a fortress built on sand, vulnerable to the first rising tide of truth. Humility, the kind born of quiet confidence, is a foundation of bedrock. A cool breeze swept across the deck. Liam didn't feel vengeful or even vindicated. He felt grateful, grateful for the clarity he had been given. He had been forced to see the truth of his marriage, and in doing so, he had been liberated to find the truth of himself. He was not Liam Sterling, Clara's struggling husband. He was Liam Sterling, architect, a man who built things, and his greatest project, he now realized, was not the tower of steel and glass rising in the distance, but the quiet, unshakable structure of his own life. He had a city to reshape, a future to build, and for the first time, he was building it entirely for himself. What a journey that was. It's a powerful reminder that a person's true worth is internal, and it can never be defined by the shallow judgments of others. Sometimes the quietest people in the room are the ones with the most to say. What did you think of Liam's story? Do you think he handled the situation in the right way? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you found this story satisfying, please don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content just like this. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.